My parents gave my brothers and I had 3 brothers, a twin brother and 2 younger brothers, a pretty amazing childhood in that it was a childhood spent almost entirely in play. It was a time when there was no television, there was no internet, and we would just roam the countryside. The Saturday afternoon matinee. In those days, they'd have the serial, the cartoon, and the double feature. It was a regular ritual. You'd have no idea what the movie was. And that had a massive influence on me, of course. So ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be a doctor. And I went to medical school, eventually, with my twin brother. I had no intention of making films, but I started to make a couple of short films, again, out of curiosity. I did my residency at St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. I remember on weekends I'd go and work on any little film I could. There was no money, no one was being paid any money at the time. So I started on that process and I kept practicing medicine. It wasn't until a decade later, by the time I'd finished the second Mad Max, that I basically even stopped doing. I kept registered as a doctor, simply because there was an obligation to have a doctor on set if you were doing stunts. The first film I ever made was probably for $50. Everything was bought, it was borrowed. And then Byron Kennedy got a grant for $491 to make a short, which I edited. And then we made a short, which was the first one that made an impact publicly, called Violence in the Cinema Part 1. It cost something like $1,200. And so Byron and I rather arrogantly said, well, let's make a feature. And that was Mad Max. I spent a year writing it. We spent 18 months raising 350 Australian dollars from family and friends. And Village Roadshow put in the last 25,000. I didn't know what we were doing. Mel Gibson was straight out of NIDA. He didn't know what he was doing. But there was this basic instinct there from when I was watching movies back in Chinchilla. I learnt to make movies by watching movies, as most people really should do. In Japan, where it was first a big success, they saw it as a samurai movie. They saw Max as a samurai. The French called it a Western on wheels. The Scandinavians called it, a lone Viking. I was very aware of how I'd failed almost on every level, but managed to get that film out there, and it spoke to people, and that was a very powerful lesson, to learn about that. That was a way tougher movie to make. It had a bigger budget, but it was physically a much more arduous film to make. By then, I knew what I was doing, and the crew knew what they had to do. I've always been a producer on every film we've made. It meant that I wasn't just a director, just a writer, or just a producer. It meant that as a director, I had final cut from my very first film. So for 40 years, I've had final cut. Now, final cut is a very important thing for a filmmaker, because ultimately they are the final arbiter of what gets on the screen. Most films made today, the director doesn't have a final cut. It's usually driven by the studio. Relentless curiosity is the thing that sustains you and keeps you going. If I was thinking, okay, I'm making another Mad Max film, I'll just do what I did 30 years ago, it would have been invisible. And I noticed almost in every facet of life. Those that cannot adapt die. Adapt or die. It's a slogan, but it's so true. I would say that the total revenue of the films would far exceed $1 billion, Australian dollars or American dollars, whatever, because it's not only what you get at the box office, of course, it's all the subsequent showings. Now, Mad Max 1 was released almost 40 years ago now, and somewhere still on television and sometimes in the cinema, it's still showing. I mean, it was ultra low budget film. We ran out of money to edit the film. So I remember a friend lent us a small apartment in North Melbourne. He did the sound while I was in the kitchen cutting the picture on the crudest editing machine you could possibly afford. It took a year. It's a comprehensive process. You can't divide it. It's organic. The one informs the other. If you concentrate just on the art and not the business, you're never going to make a film that's going to be seen in the cinema. If you concentrate just on the business without any regard to the artistic context, the film, no one's going to respond to the film. My major criterion is, for how long does it follow you out of the cinema? You can watch a movie and you can forget about it by the time you get to the car park. Some movies or some moments in movies stay with you for all your life. And if you can make a movie that endures for longer than it takes them to get into the car in the car park, then you've made an okay movie. To be honest, awards don't really amount to much. The accomplishment is the work, to the extent that it's successful by whatever criteria you want to measure it by. I guess the thing that I feel most satisfied by is the fact that I've been able to generate ideas, to actually imagine something, and then to see it expressed in the world through cinema, and then to see that somehow impinge on the global culture. And I'm always shocked by how people come and tell you, look, I saw Lorenzo's Oil and it helped me to deal with a medical problem in the family. When someone says, I saw Happy Feet and it had this effect on me, or I saw a Mad Max movie, it had this effect on me. That's a big thing and a big responsibility. He always spoke about reputation. But he said you can make a reputation in 20 years and you can lose it in 20 minutes. Until I was 30, I had no idea what it meant. He always said, never do anything that is going to worry you at night. I'm proud of being a Queenslander, particularly in terms of the childhood that it gave me. Queensland is still part of my DNA, simply because those formative years were so influential.